Mystic Village, the old Mystic Village, is in Mystic, Connecticut. As you can see there, Mystic, Connecticut is located very near New London. And if you look on the top right, it's between Boston and bottom left, New York. The old Mystic Village is right off Route 95, and I happened to be there this February 2019. There was a snowstorm on 12 February. It was a blizzard. And on the next day, I went out to walk around the old Mystic Village. This was around 7:30 in the morning. And it was very, as you can see, very overcast. But I really liked the way that this very old well and the sort of the wagon on the right looked like. I decided for the painting to go with the vertical image, which I also thought had a bit more contrast. In order to do the sketch, I used these different pencils. These are pencils that I have since I was in elementary school. They are about 50 years old, and I've taken care of them very well. So as you can see from the left to the right, we go from the one that has more graphite, the 2H, to the one that's a darker one, the 4B. These are the numbers I had. And for the sketch, I used the H, which is very light for the light positioning of the original sketch. Then I used the 2B, but moved very quickly to the 4B. So the sketch basically that I did was just positioning the shapes. And as I mentioned, the H was used for the general shapes and the 2B and 4B for the darker areas. What I'm showing here is looking at my sketch and looking at the photo. I have no idea why, but I do tend to twist things. I'm not very straight with my lines. So you can see the roof of the well, whereas in the photo, it's twisted to the right, which I think it's also a problem with the way I took the photo. In my sketch is to the tilted to the bottom left and top right. So I usually have to make sure that I can correct this when I paint. The H was used for the general sort of shaded areas, and I wanted to identify where the brightest areas were. And of course, as I mentioned, the 4B pencil was used for the darkest areas. As you can see in the photo, the shrubs look very, very dark, and I didn't want to do them as dark as the boulder. You will see also that the little wagon on the right, I didn't want to put it as dark as it's showing in the photo because I was against the light. I think that's one of the reasons why this was showing so dark. But on real life, which is one advantage of making your mental notes when you are there, is that it wasn't really that dark. I wanted to show how I prepare the Sta-Wet palette. I use the Masterson Sta-Wet palette. And what you can see there is I treated it. I boil water actually instead of putting it in a microwave, which is very big for a microwave. I boil water. I use the sponge that comes with the Masterson Sta-Wet palette and the paper. And the paper is soaked about 5 minutes in boiling water, and then I add the little sponge that comes with it, then the wet paper, and I drain it. I have been using this particular disposable paper palette on top of it. Although this palette paper is supposed to be good for mixing, what I realized is that after a few times I use it, the plastic from the acrylic does not allow any more of the quality of the paper to stay moist, and you need to get rid of it. I paint very quickly and I like to paint a lot. So if I use this disposable paper palette, I actually reuse it many times. And with a towel, of a paper towel, I make sure that I stretch it very well on top of the Sta-Wet palette. And that's the one I use for mixing. After a while, when I cannot use it anymore, I just get rid of the disposable palette and I continue to use the Stay Wet palette from the Masterson for continuing to paint. The way that I position my paints for this particular painting uh, was using the golden heavy body acrylics. I like to stay with golden. I already know the shades and the hues from their materials. I haven't tried others, but I'm sure that I mean, you can mix different brands and you can choose the brand that you prefer. I position alizarin crimson on the left, ultramarine blue in the middle, and the Indian yellow, which is a very nice transparent yellow that I have been using instead of yellow ochre, on the right. Finally, titanium white. And what you see on the right is a little bit of a smudge of this four colors in there from the palette knife when I cleaned it up. So your paints will stay wet as long as you stay in the margins outside the disposable paper palette that I used only for the mixing of my paints. But then I can actually storage, and they really have lasted over a month with no problem. Just spraying a little bit of water before you close it up. In addition, I used two brushes for this painting, a size 7 flat and a size 2 tongs cat. I could have used a round, but I had that on hand. I also used this palette knife, which is a round edge for getting my paints out from my little tubes and putting them there, because I use sort of jars for paints, and of course paper towels, plenty of paper towels. In addition, what you see there on the little yogurt cups is water. I use it only to clean the brushes when I need to move from one paint mix to another. But I do want to mention that I have been actually using the Floetrol. I did a little bit of a search. You can use any other kind of media, but since I have been using this as medium to dilute my paints and painting, the painting really comes out much nicer than when you use water. And also, people who know about it say that if you actually use water to dilute your paints, the acrylics, the binder is very diluted and it won't stay as well. It can crackle and it can actually detach from the canvas. So what I like is that when I use this Floetrol, which actually feels almost like, I think it is probably like a glue, it actually gives a very nice creamy buttery feeling to the paints, and it also makes them stay a little bit more open. In other words, a little bit more like oils when you are painting alla prima. I used this Senso linen canvas. It's a 9 by 12 and it's stretched. I get them from Jerry's Artarama. But one of the things I like about it is that this Senso linen canvas is already toned, and it's a very nice mid-tone, which is a warmer color, brownish color. However, I still used Floetrol as medium for the paints, and I did actually put a little bit back painting. I didn't take a photo of it, but what you can see here is that on that strange shape, you can see where I added the alizarin crimson, which is very transparent. So in the middle of the canvas, I first applied that alizarin crimson. And then for the rest of the canvas, I added a little bit of ultramarine blue and titanium white for the rest of the canvas before I started adding some of these shapes. So apologies, I didn't have the tone canvas photo first, but you can get an idea of how I did it. So using the sketch that I had made, I first placed the lines. And again, I'm very conscious that my lines in the sketch are not necessarily parallel, but I did try to make them better in the painting. So the first thing was the horizontal lines of the buildings and the bottom of the roof of the well. as well as the street in the back and then the street that's coming to the front. This will help with the linear perspective and give an idea of the perspective of these buildings. And the general painting, although there's more atmospheric perspective, I think, in this particular painting. As you can see, the wagon is just very lightly sketched in there, but I have all the elements that I need in this first pass of blocking in the canvas. The shapes that I added first were after I had the tone canvas on purple, I added the brightest brights. And that was very clear from the photo. And, in my sketch, I didn't note where the lights were, but fortunately, I did have the reference photo. Then I added the well roof, the triangular shape. And then I just basically did the darkest boulder and a little bit of the snow. And the next step, I defined the structures a bit better. The shrubs in the front, they were very dark, as I mentioned in the photograph, but I didn't want to do them so dark. So you'll see that I will be lightening them up. But in this step, I'm defining the back as a building with some windows. I actually also worked on tonal values. The purple of the sky, as you can see, they're very broad brush strokes. I wanted to make it a little bit grayer. And also in the buildings in the back, I wanted to make them slightly lighter. I used a lot of the negative painting with light blue for the snow in the back. And as you can see, the railings coming into the well are just basically what remains from the first step, as well as the wagon on the right. I'm not painting that yet. It's just painting around negative painting with the light blue. So on the next step, I started adding some of the local color. And I think the most evident is the roof of the well. Where there was almost a rusted color there of a metallic material. I don't really know if it was copper or bronze or what is it, but I wanted to start adding some of the local colors. And again, the brush strokes are going to help also define what you're painting. Uh, the shrubs in the dark, I opened them up a little bit with negative painting using a bit of the purple. And again, I didn't want to see them so dark in the front. The snow in the front, I started working a bit more on defining it and making some different colors. Painting snow is really fun. I don't use any pure white at all, and it has a lot of different reflections of different colors. So purple, the blues, and the yellows and pinkish are really fun to start doing. I did open up, printed that tree in the back, but I started opening up a little bit with the negative painting on the sky. And the other thing is I made sure that those railings would be staying and not paint around them, but try not to block them completely. I will define those railings for the entrance of the well later on. So in this step, I worked a bit more on the roof. The roof had a brighter light at the bottom of the roof, but not as bright as this one. So you'll see that I'm correcting it later. I felt that the whole painting had tonal value was very, very similar in the back. So I started adding a bit more of the shades and reflections of the snow in the back and making it a little lighter to push it further back. The boulder in the front was too light, and I realized it was actually in the shade. So I started using more shade so that the brighter reflections would be more notable by contrast of darkening the boulder. And I also added some structure to the snow. There were some paths, probably some people were walking around, and I wanted to make sure that that could show. On this next step, I think you can start seeing how the brightest areas are looking brighter because I'm darkening a little bit of the areas around it. Um, I did add more blue to the back because it still felt like it was not blue enough and cold enough to make it, go further back. I also changed that brightness of the roof. It was too bright before, but the roof was slightly brighter than the sky, and I wanted to make sure that showed up. On the boulder, I added more structure to the snow, and I will continue working on it. So as you can see here on the final details of the painting, what I did is I worked on making uh, the back buildings even bluer and lighter. So that brought them a little bit back, and I worked a bit more on that roof and the lining of the roof and the size of the windows. So I shaped it better. The sort of the old wagon, which I know it's difficult to see that it's an old wagon. I know it is. You can just see it as a structure, but it was too dark. So I made it a little bit lighter, painting some purple on top. Although I did leave the surrounding edges on the darkest one. I also added the well. The well had a little bit of a wall and it goes to the railings. And the way that I did it, I painted in dark and then I used negative painting, just very faint lines of very light purple color horizontal that gives the impression of these being the horizontal uh, planks of wood that make the wall of the well. And also, I worked a little bit more on the railings that come on the different directions. So, one is coming closer to us and the other one is farther from us. So I did define those a bit better, as well as defining the tree in the back. I also shaded the boulder a bit more because it was way too bright and I wanted to keep the brightest part of the painting where the reflection from the sunlight was coming. I did open more of the bright skylights as I was seeing them that day in the morning. The sky is probably still a bit too dark, but I sort of like it because it makes the brightest brighter. And I also finally added the branches to the right. That tree on the right, those branches actually do make a slight difference in the painting compared to when I had not put them there. So I hope you enjoyed it. I did enjoy painting this and go out and paint.